last week when I spoke about finding hope when hope is hard to find. I entreated us to get active. I suggested we could find hope by getting active in our resistance and working against that which makes us feel hopeless. Ironically, I found hope in all the ugliness that is surfacing because we can now see it and address it. I recommended us inhabiting our magnificence, working for the greater good of humanity as an effective way to combat despair. And then this week happened. And if I didn't know better, I'd say there's some higher power testing my resolve to find hope again and again. This week, the raging inferno arrived in many of our communities. And if that wasn't enough to keep us busy, we've also learned of the tax break for multi-billion-dollar corporations and of the opening of sacred lands in Utah to fossil fuels. And we've become the only nation outside of Israel to offend a few billion more people by moving our embassy to Jerusalem. Dialogue and reason seem to be very much missing in our dialogue at this moment. And that's just some of the hope-thwarting bad news of this past week. The relentless pace of challenging headlines amazes me constantly these days. Whether it's major climate events, terrorism, or shocking politics, disturbing events seem to have dramatically increased over this past year. So once again, I found myself worrying and feeling rather hopeless. And last night, I was awakened several times by alternately power cuts and then emergency evacuation alerts. First one saying, a civic alert, everyone must evacuate now, and not knowing where to evacuate at 2:20 in the night. And then 15 minutes later hearing that was a mistake. Actually, just Carpinteria, the hills of Carpinteria and the mountain areas above Montecito need to evacuate mandatorily. But it was enough to cause a very anxiety-filled night. So how can we act with enough alacrity and effectiveness to be able to save our world that seems to be burning before our very eyes? How can we protect our planet, our communities, our families, when fires are being started all around us, both literally and metaphorically? And how can we battle the flames when they are so quickly fanned by the hot winds of hate and destruction? If I'm feeling that way, I imagine there are a few of you who may feel similarly. Am I right? Are some of you feeling the struggle of maintaining hope over despair? Yeah. Fortunately, we have the gift of coming together in community. We can come out of our solitude and despair and find solace in each other's faces. We can leave our isolated homes and share our feelings, our fears, and frustrations with one another. And we can support each other when times get tough. Now, I don't know how many of you saw the video of the wild rabbit running confusedly towards the flames in La Conchita, and a man desperately trying to save it. The rabbit runs around looking frightened and confused and starts heading right towards the giant flames. And the man, foolishly it seems, but resolutely, tries to catch the terrified rabbit to bring it to safety. And eventually, miraculously, he's able to somehow grab it, pick it up, and walk it out of harm's way, even though he put his own life at risk doing so. Now, in the rapid confusion and terror of everything going on in our world, we can feel like that rabbit, running anxiously everywhere and in the wrong direction. But we can also be that man for each other. We can take turns as community helping each other when we feel lost, confused, or scared. and don't know where to turn. It's through being in community together that we can find hope. This week, as I looked out at the orangey-brown, asphyxiating blanket of smoke and ash that covered Santa Barbara, I felt deep sadness. And as I drove by the raging flames next to the 101 earlier this week, I realized once again people were losing everything with barely any warning. There was a particularly painful story about a couple who had just lost everything up in Sonoma, only to have their second home they were renting in Ventura also completely destroyed. Having housed evacuees who lost their homes in previous fires, I know only too well the devastating impact this has on people's lives. But then I also remembered how disaster brings out mostly humanity's strengths and goodness. All around, people are asking, how can I help? What can I do to assist those most impacted by the fires? Schools, churches, and community centers are collecting supplies for those in need. Direct Relief, one of our family's favorite rescue organizations, donated tens of thousands of masks to people in Santa Barbara County to help protect them from breathing in the extremely hazardous air. Neighbors are reaching out to neighbors whom they'd never spoken to before to see how they can help one another. And locally, the divides of politics and party, of class and race, along with other things that separate us, are mostly suspended. In times of crisis, people seem to care more about one another's well-being and about their community than their divisions. And that brings me hope. During the Sonoma fires, their community came up with a slogan, "The love in the air is thicker than the smoke." The love in the air is thicker than the smoke, and I can feel that here too in our community. We saw those stories with Hurricane Harvey of people who got into their boats and traversed dangerous floods to rescue anyone they could. We heard the accounts of Mexico after the earthquakes, of people coming out and helping the search efforts despite putting their own lives in danger. And we're seeing it again now among our heroic community firefighters and first responders who work 24/7 and risk all to save others' lives. In the midst of great struggle and anguish, people's better natures are emerging as they recognize our common humanity. And that brings me hope. Community such as this makes us stronger and kinder. It gives us courage of many to address what may feel frightening or overpowering. And it reminds us that we are not alone. It helps us to be more effective. So I'd like to tell you a story of another community coming together. Back in the early 1990s, the citizens of Billings, Montana decided they wanted to do something about the increased racism, hate, and bigotry in their rural part of the state. White supremacists, Ku Klux Klan, and skinheads were spreading hate literature and fear in their town. In the cemetery, Jewish gravestones were being toppled and vandalized. And one night, an interracial couple's home was defaced with swastikas and graffiti. But quickly, in defense of this couple, a group of painters gathered together and volunteered their time to repaint the house. And when skinheads started showing up at the African Methodist Episcopal Church to intimidate people, a group of white Christians joined them regularly in vigil and for worship. On another night, a brick was violently thrown through a 6-year-old Jewish boy, Isaac's, window. He had a lit menorah and decorations in his window to celebrate Hanukkah. His mother, Tammy Schmitzer, shared this story with a local paper. and the Billings Gazette created a centerfold picture of a menorah and invited Billings residents to put them in their windows. Suddenly, families of all different ethnicities and religions were putting menorahs in their windows to show solidarity with the Schnitzers. In fact, it became an annual tradition in Billings. As the hate crimes increased in response, hundreds of menorahs grew to be thousands. And soon, community members declared together that an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. In fact, the townspeople put up a billboard at the entrance to their town proclaiming, "Not in our town. No hate, no violence, peace on earth." Eventually, the Ku Klux Klan and skinheads backed off, and acts of vandalism and hate have stopped in that community. Community coming together and acting as a united force against hate and bigotry changed the culture of this town. They formed a group called Not in Our Town, specifically to transform what was happening there. And this later grew into a national nonprofit movement countering hate and bigotry all over the US. Communities can make a much greater impact than individuals alone. It made me think about our CVU-UF community and how we come together again and again to act courageously in the face of difficulties. Whether it's a member's death or illness, or an opportunity to support freedom of education or LGBTQ rights, we gather to help. And the new members who've joined us today will strengthen us further. The beauty of our community is that we show up. We show up. We show up to help each other. Now, we all go through varied capacities for courage and resilience at different times in our lives. When some feel vulnerable, others have strength to share. When some feel hopeless, others will have hope and inspiration to spare. When some feel heartbroken, others will have healed hearts to offer them. And when some feel angry, others will have a calm, grounded presence to hold and recognize that fire. And now, with our many wonderful new members and friends, there are more of us with more skills and more love to share. When we add new people to our community, we have an extraordinary opportunity. We have an opportunity to learn from them. We have a chance to build new friendships and relationships. We have new stories, new cultures, new talents and ideas amongst us. We have more capacity for leadership, for creativity, and sustainability. Our new members bring new hope and possibility to our community. We're not the same as we were last week or last month or even last year. In fact, we've had over 30 new people join us within the last year, which means that roughly a sixth of our congregation is new. We may wonder how things might change with so many new faces in our midst. I know that sometimes, especially when you've been part of a community for a long time, it can feel disorienting to add new people into the congregation. You felt comfortable because you knew everyone, and you were used to a certain way of doing things, and now you don't know everyone, and things are changing. But this is where we have the chance to grow beyond our tribal instincts that would have us stick to all the familiar faces. This is when I encourage us to find our excitement and curiosity about all that is new. This is where we Unitarian Universalists have the opportunity to lead by example and live into Rumi's words of, "Come, come, whoever you are." Our fear-driven society right now encourages us to close ranks and keep out the new. Instead, we get to be countercultural by opening our arms and embracing difference and change. Now, it can be a challenging spiritual practice for some. Change isn't easy for most people. It isn't easy for individuals or institutions. Singer-songwriter Win Butler from the indie rock band Arcade Fire said, "I don't go to church now, but what I got from it was a sense of belonging to something bigger. What I really miss is being forced to be in a community with people that aren't the same as you. Then you really have to work through the ways that you're different." When we're part of a congregation like this, we have the privilege, and I mean the privilege, of belonging to something greater than us. We can be reminded week in and week out that together we're so much stronger and more capable than we are alone. Just look at how we came together today generously with our offering plate. We are helping meet urgent needs in our wider community and are making a difference together in people's lives. We are serving the spirit of love, justice, and compassion. As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs writes, religion creates community. Community creates altruism. And altruism turns us away from self towards the common good. There's something about the tenor of relationships within a religious community that makes it the best tutorial in citizenship and good neighborliness. So right here, right now, in this fellowship, is where hope lives and breathes. The hope of our community is that we can grow into better versions of ourselves. The hope of our community is we can serve life in ways that are so much more effective than we could alone. The hope of our community is that we can support one another as we face the challenges of life. The hope of our community is that we will experience a deep sense of belonging because we are welcomed as our true, authentic, unique selves. Brené Brown talks about belonging in her new book, Braving the Wilderness. And I believe we have it here in our library thanks to our devoted librarian, Sylvia Flores-Johnson. Brené Brown claims that our current divisiveness is about sorting ourselves into affinity groups. She believes we do this to get a sense of belonging to something. As many of our institutions crumble and families increasingly move away from each other, belonging is becoming a more sought-after feeling. We're seeking community to heal the pain of isolation and depression. Now, Brown praises authentic belonging through honoring shared pain and joys, such as we often do in church and do here every week. And she says that sense of belonging is enhanced with shared music and rituals. Belonging, she says, is an integral part of our well-being and sense of wholeness within. True belonging is not passive, Brown writes. It's not the belonging that comes with just joining a group, and it's not fitting in or pretending or selling out because it's safer. It's a practice that requires us to be vulnerable, to get uncomfortable, and learn how to be present with people without sacrificing who we are. To brave the wilderness, we must learn how to trust ourselves and trust others. One of my favorite theologians was the late, great Howard Thurman, an African-American minister, writer, and social activist. He was Martin Luther King Jr.'s minister and a friend of Gandhi's. Thurman helped King find hope in the face of many despairing moments. Thurman told King, one of the reasons we're in community is to offer each other hope. I know I feel so much hope every time I have the privilege of stepping into this pulpit and looking out at all of you. I wish more of you could come up here and see the beautiful, loving faces out there. It truly is a privilege. Being together with all of you, sharing ideas and co-creating our ministry in the world is a blessing and an honor, and it gives me great hope. So would you indulge me for a moment? I want you just to take a moment and turn to a neighbor and tell them about what about this community gives you hope. Just one thing each. It might only be one word. And if there are people without partners, please join a group of two. So what about being in this community gives you hope? I'll ring the chime to end our brief time of sharing.
Music. All right. Silliness. Silly.
Clearly, there's a very alive conversation here about this community, and I invite you to continue it in Fellowship Hall after the service is over. And please share with me some of your thoughts at coffee hour. So in closing, I wish to share the words of my esteemed colleague, the Reverend Sean Parker Dennison. Sean is one of our transgender ministers. The message of hope that still blazes bright for me in these hard times is that I am not alone. I don't have to face the world alone, and I don't have to fix the world alone. When I need hope, I find it in the faces of my people. I find it in their hearts when we find each other again and stop hiding out, thinking we are the only one. I find it when we come together in community to sing, to bless one another, to mourn, and to strategize. All we need is hope. And for that, we have each other. My friends, may we indeed find hope in one another and in this community. We are each other's chosen family, and that brings me infinite hope, even on the most difficult of days. Thank you. Blessed be.